And I'm not going to start quite yet. I see people are actively joining, so let's just see if there's a... We have Nicola Di Stefano, the head of our ethics board. He is now joined. Okay. Let me just wait. I'm going to give 1 more minute here, and then we'll get started. Can everybody see my slides? Okay,
yes.
perfect. Thank you. Okay, Pascal's giving the thumbs up, and okay, yeah, we have a decent crowd. I think more people will trickle in, but we can go ahead and get started now. Are we recording yet, Mathilde? We are. Okay, great. So before I start, I just wanted to ask everybody who's joining us, most everybody has their microphones muted, but just please remember, if you're not the active speaker or in a dialogue with someone, please do mute your microphone. We'll maybe mute it for you if you're not muting it yourself. Just try to be mindful of that. And Robin, I'm prepared to introduce everyone. Robin Augustine is here. He's our coordinator for the B-CRATOS projects, coming to us from Sweden. There he is waving. So Robin is leading a research group at Uppsala University that's researching novel ways of transmitting data through tissue rather than through wires. So you can use fat tissue as a channel for data. It's one of the innovations we're working on this project. We're not going to hear so much about that today, but if anybody has thoughts on that, that may get tied into discussion later. Okay, so my name is Paul Wanda. I'm with BlackRock Microsystems Europe. We're a partner in the B-CRATOS Consortium. This is a project here in the European Union, receiving funding from the Horizon Research and Innovation Program. As you can see on the slide here, B-CRATOS stands for Wireless Brain Connect Interface to Machines, a bit of creative acronym or word formation there. Anybody who's ever worked on a DARPA project can probably appreciate that. And today we're going to be in our 9th webinar hosting a discussion, some presentation and discussion regarding the clinical and user impacts of BCI. We have some external guests to the consortium here with us today. This webinar is open to the public as well, folks who have registered. So not everybody who's here, I see some unfamiliar names joining us, and I think we're going to have more folks joining us from our consortium as another meeting wraps up. But not everyone here is from the B-CRATOS consortium in the audience. Everybody, please feel free to ask questions at the appropriate times. I'm just going to give us a brief introduction to the B-CRATOS projects, just so everybody knows who we are, but then I'm going to hand over the virtual microphone to our guests, and we'll have some discussion. So B-CRATOS is all about trying to create the opportunity for next generation BCI systems. The objective is really to restore people's ability to move and be independent. And the concept is really that we've seen these wonderful research systems. This photograph of one of the research participants who was implanted with BlackRock Utah electrode arrays. I believe that's Nathan shaking Barack Obama's hand using a robotic hand at a demonstration, I think, gosh, probably 6, 7, 8 years ago now. I don't actually recall exactly when. We've seen these kind of wonderful demonstrations of different BCI platforms in human patients. What do we need to take these from the research setting and bring them to the everyday setting? And our purpose is to work on these technologies that can make BCI systems more practical for everyday use. Some of the indications we hope to enable BCI to be used for are things such as spinal cord injury, ALS, stroke. Stroke in particular, there's over 1 million new cases per year in Europe, over 14 million worldwide. And we're hoping that we can make BCI systems available for folks suffering from mobility impairment due to either traumatic events or other disorders. Sorry, I have a thing covering up. There we go. So what do we wish to address in B-CRATOS? Well, a few of the aspects of these implantable BCI systems that we're trying to push some technology forward on, and where we think BCI is being held back to some degree. One of them is that small data is not going to support big apps in our view. So if you look at some of the implantable devices out there right now, where we can interface with the brain and record some data, maybe make some decisions about how to apply treatment based on that data. Here I have a diagram, an image of the NeuroPace implantable devices used to treat epilepsy and related disorders. We're recording very few low-resolution channels of data. There's very few recording sites in the brain, very few sites to stimulate. And you can do a lot with that, but when you're looking at some of the demonstrations that you're seeing in publications now, such as this Nature publication from 2023, where they're decoding things such as speech directly from neural activity, we're talking about hundreds of high-resolution channels of recorded data using Utah electrode arrays. You're not going to accomplish this unless you have some miracle algorithm. You're not going to accomplish this with just 4 or 8 ECOG electrodes implanted in the brain. At least that's unlikely. So we need to enable the implantables of the future to capture lots of data. Of course, when you start talking about capturing and recording lots of data from the brain, now you have to wonder about how are we going to power these devices? How are we going to transmit the data that's being recorded if it's a full implantable? So battery replacement is one of the most common reasons for additional surgery in DBS patients. As devices get larger, they become less practical for implantation. You can implant less of the devices. There's just more that can go wrong. Bulky batteries are one of the reasons for that. So we're developing technologies that should enable us to capture lots of data, but with very low power requirements, or also supplemented by wireless powering. And again, when you look at some of the patients who have participated in these wonderful research studies, and we're going to hear more about that today, you can see all the cabling, the percutaneous connectors. We need full implantable systems to enable everyday BCI systems, better wireless solutions. As you start ramping up the amount of data you record, now you need more and more wiring. What if there were a way to move this data off the patient or around the patient's body without large bulky cables and wiring to do something fully wireless and implantable? And that's another purpose of our research here. So we're developing with the B-CRATOS project the first wireless neural bypass platform technologies that can support these kind of big data apps. We're demonstrating this in non-human primates in the scope of our current project, interfacing with a sophisticated prosthetic hand. We're going to demonstrate rapid two-way wireless communication, so that's a readout of data from an implantable and stimulation back to sensory cortex. And we're using high data rate backscatter and fat in-body communication techniques. So some new wireless technologies that should have low power requirements but allow us to move around lots of data and fast. And of course, this could be adaptable to other neural controlled applications, not just prosthetic control, but of course you could interface with computers and sensors and so forth. And our goal is really to create a system that can be implanted, but without all the extra bulky batteries, without the extra wiring, something that could have more practical application for everyday use. So enough about B-CRATOS. That was just to kind of set the stage for who we are in terms of hosting the webinar. Today we have some guest speakers who are going to talk to us a little bit about some of the research that they've been involved in, and then I'd like to have some healthy discussion following up. Have this more as a discussion structure with Q&A rather than just listening to guys like me talk and go through slides for many minutes. So Misha Saraya is a doctor and professor with the Raphael Center for Neurorestoration at the Farber Institute for Neuroscience at Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia. He co-founded Cyberkinetics, which one day turned into BlackRock, I would say. At least some part of that did. And he also helped design the first BrainGate trial. And he's here to talk to us about some of the research that's ongoing in his research group at Jefferson. We also have Ian Burkhart joining us. He's tetraplegic following a driving accident in 2010, and he took part in a clinical trial involving brain-computer interfaces to manage muscle stimulation. So kind of functional electrical stimulation or restoration. I think it was actually with an external sleeve rather, as opposed to implanted wiring, but to restore movement in his fingers and wrist. He'll share his experience during the webinar with respect to that study. He's also a member of the BCI Pioneers Coalition, which is this digital forum led by some of the world's first implantable BCI participants in these kinds of research. We also have Scott Embry with us today. He's also has experienced some level of paralysis with fine motor skill limitation from a car accident back in '85. In 2020, he joined the BCI study at University of Chicago, looking to help people with spinal cord injuries. And he's been participating in research where he's been controlling a robotic hand and arm, but aided by sensory feedback, and of course, to advance the science. This is all research participation. So our webinar agenda, again, I'm going to start with Misha, and he'll give us a brief presentation on the Cortimo trial, which he was running at Jefferson. And then we could have a few minutes for Q&A. After we've wrapped up on that Q&A, then I'll throw it over to Ian and Scott, who can talk about their BCI research participation, followed by another chance for Q&A with the audience. And then I think it would be nice at that point to maybe also think a little more broadly. We can, of course, spend the webinar focusing on what we learned about Cortimo, what we learned about the BCI research participation that Ian and Scott are here to talk to us about. But we could also maybe more generally talk about topics that are of interest to our consortium, which is where can the biggest impacts be made on BCI systems for everyday use in the future? What technologies could really have the greatest impact on quality of life for the first users of such systems? In your opinions as users and as clinician, what is in fact holding back BCI right now? I know there's some efforts right now to go into clinical trials with Neuralink and some other groups, but where are we seeing the technologies falling short right now? And I think that's of interest to the consortium. Okay. So that being said, Misha, I will throw the webinar over to you and stop sharing.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Paul, for the invitation and to the B-CRATOS team. Good to see you, Ian, and nice to meet you, Scott, and everyone else. So my name is Mihail Saruya, nickname Misha. I'm just going to do just a few slides here. I'll try to strike a balance between pace and comprehension. So the Rockefeller Center we're trying to create like an incubator to do device development at Thomas Jefferson University, which is primarily a clinical site. We've 18 hospital system that treats over 7 million human beings each year. And we're trying to orient this development of technology around these areas of movement, restoration, pain relief, and memory, and starting with movement restoration and really focusing on stroke. And I should say, having worked in this for some time, the decision to go after subcortical stroke was very intentional, with the idea being that if we want to help people who have spinal cord injury, ALS, and conditions that are not as common, that maybe we could induce more investment and interest by going after something more common. So that was why we decided this. We have a big interdisciplinary team. Some of them may be on the call, and we're very fortunate to have a group that has, rehabilitation clinicians, engineers, data scientists, industrial design. So the Cortimo trial, so this is Aaron Euland. He gave permission for his name to be described. So this is, again, a multidisciplinary team. This was published in Nature Communications Medicine a few years ago. This is a basic picture of the overall system. So there are two multiports that each have two 64-channel 8x8 electrode arrays that are implanted in the cerebral cortex overlying a chronic subcortical stroke. And this was approved, obviously, by the FDA as an investigational device exemption trial. So at age 39, he had a subcortical right basal ganglia stroke. For those of you who don't know, the radiologic convention is that the left hand of the screen is actually the right, as if the person sitting in the scanner with their belly up, looking from their toes upwards towards them. So you can see that bright white signal, that's a diffusion signal of the area where was injured by the stroke. And at the bottom, you can see about 2 years later that there's a hole essentially where the stroke sort of punched a hole where there was loss of oxygen. And in addition, you can see the ventricles are slightly larger on the right side. That's called hydrocephalus ex vacuo as the brain changes due to the injury from the stroke. He, in fact, had multiple embolic strokes in multiple brain areas that have other implications when we talk about BCI decoding. The design of the trial was that first, the person does several weeks of occupational physical therapy, sort of screening with what we use at the time, the MyaPro device, which is an off-the-shelf system that sort of picks up EMG signals and then uses that as a kind of power steering to help with movement at the elbow and wrist joint. Then there was the implant. And then during that time period of 3 months, there's intensive occupational physical therapy and us trying to figure out if we can use the brain-computer interface to do something beyond what the MyaPro can do by itself. And then the device is removed and continued to follow him. I designed this trial this way. I thought that 1 month would not be enough time to figure things out. And the reason to cut it off at 3 months was that he is ambulatory. So that means he can fall down. And if you have this titanium, the concern was that if that were to fall and hit that, we don't want a skull fracture, not to mention the risk of infection. So remember, this is a person who can walk around. He has pretty much full control of one half of his body but sort of down that way. And the other half sort of is variable. There's some foot drop, but some function has returned. So this is where this is an MRI, a model based on his anatomy. This is sort of the rough location of the arrays as was planned preoperatively. The green is this area of sensory cortex from fMRI. So when he's sitting in the magnet, the radiologist gently touching his hand. And the blue is for imagined movement of the paralyzed hand. Now, one thing that's unusual in this case is that there's a gradient of movement, right? So if you put your fingers in Aaron's hand and you say squeeze down, he can squeeze it in his paralyzed or it's weakened paretic hand. But if you ask him to open his fingers, he cannot. So right from the beginning, the question is, what do you ask the person to do in the magnet? Do you say, try to open your hand? And of course, if someone tries to open the hand and they've had a stroke, they'll do what they only can do, which is close the hand. So it's actually quite confusing in terms of what the instruction is and what the intent is. In any case, you can see here from the different slices of the MRI, these are areas that will sort of light up with both sensation and gently imagined movement opening of the hand. So these were implanted in the surgery. Here's an X-ray post-op. You can see the two BlackRock connectors. You can kind of see the 4 arrays. And here's sort of a picture what it sort of looks like. And these circles are trying to show the motor centroid of the fMRI, which actually is located in the central sulcus. And here, as you know, we can't do an MRI with the arrays in, but we can sort of infer what the position is based on the CT. And here's again the scan. So the first thing is when we plug it in, we get electrical activity. What this is showing you here is that there's obviously quite significant ischemic damage right sort of above this. So here's the precentral sulcus, precentral gyrus, and then you can sort of see this ischemic changes. And so we weren't sure what we were going to get. The fMRI obviously showed that there's global changes in blood flow, but as we all know, the spatial resolution of that versus the BlackRock arrays are very different. So we're reassured to know that we immediately have good single unit activity on these electrode arrays. But we did notice some things that were different than what's reported in other people who've had these implanted, including some of our guests here today. So remember, Aaron's had a stroke, multiple strokes in his brain. And we noticed that the arrays that were closest to the sort of overlying that large subcortical stroke had these sort of unusual bursting activity. You can see spikes across channels. We're still been analyzing for the last 3 years to try to make sense of what this means. There's also other changes in spectrographic power. I'm not going to get into now. Those are those bursts. Similar, though, to what we did nearly 20 years ago, starting out with a brain gate, just sort of had him both do actual tasks and imagine tasks. Because remember, he can do both. And so this is just to imagine wrist extension, and you can see certain channels that seem to modulate with that. Again, getting the instruction just right was a very big challenge. Do you watch it? Do you imagine it? Do you attempt it? Do you kind of try it? And then what this is showing is, taking the different signals from the array and integrating them as a leaky integrator, which is a way of integrating spike activity across channels, and then sort of mapping it into the different positions of the hand and elbow. This is described in the publication. I'm not going to go into it. We also did kin arm trials with what he's able to do. This one basically shows that in the course of the 3 months, the spasticity in his arm got better rather than worse, because one of the things, of course, we want to make sure is we do no harm. We're putting, after all, electrodes, an investigational neurosurgery right over where he's had a stroke. And the issue is you don't want to make it worse. And so by showing that his spasticity, which we want these trends to go down, less spastic, got better, at least is reassuring. In this left picture here, he's using EMG control just to sort of trigger that motor. It looks pretty, sort of subtle there. And then he's essentially using his hand as a living clamp. Let's see if I make this a little quieter. So, we're not trying to restore in this particular trial the ability to do fine finger control. This is really just a sort of an all or none hand grasp. And of course, I assume all people on this call are, if you have both your arms, I realize maybe not everyone doesn't since you're doing prosthetic arm control, but human beings have a fine dominant arm and then a stabilizing hand. And so the idea of this was to restore that stabilizing function. And that's sort of what the MyoPro system is designed to do. In this picture here,
controlling his biceps, triceps, and brain is controlling hand.
So this is a mixture of residual EMG control. And remember, his hand is paralyzed. He can't actually open that hand at all. So the motor is doing it for him, and it's being triggered by his brain activity being decoded by the Utah arrays. And so anyway, what's showing at the bottom here is that we compared, he basically is his own control, right? So we can either trigger this hand open close based on his residual EMG activity that he has in his arm, or we can do it versus his brain activity. And what we found is that he's much faster with the brain activity. Now, why is that? So he has a lot of tone in his hand, and so when he's trying to modulate whatever residual EMG activity, it tends to be very effortful. It causes abnormal muscle activation. So this, by recording directly from the cortex, it gives the person an opportunity to sort of get back to the original way they controlled it before the stroke. And so when we can do that, he's not fighting the motors with his abnormal tone. And then just to wrap this up quickly, after 3 months, it was taken out. It turned out the universe was making it clear that it needed to be taken out because in the last week when it was already scheduled, a small infection with these are typical scalp organisms that just live on all of us. And they start to get into the pedestal site. They never migrated past that. But even so, as you know, when these are foreign bodies, if bacteria and fungus create a biofilm, then you essentially will never get it out. You'll have to have someone on antibiotics, antimicrobial, antifungal agents for the rest of their life. So once a foreign body is colonized, it has to be removed. And in any case, you can see that there's some fibrotic tissue over this. It's removed, and there was no motor deficits from any of this, and we described that in that paper. The ultimate goal is to obviously have a fully wireless system, which is what you all are working on. In this case, rather than connecting to a completely artificial limb, the ideal is to actually have some sort of implanted stimulators. And we know from the work coming from Pittsburgh, it could be spinal cord stimulators. So I'm going to end there and hand it over to the others. The only thing I'll say is that, although we were focused on the brain decoding, what was most salient to our participant, Aaron, was the hand system. And so we spent the last few years developing our own 3D upper extremity system to restore hand function. So, but I will, if there's other questions, I can go back to them. But I'm going to stop sharing and let Ian and Scott talk. Hopefully I didn't take too long. Thank you.
Oh, it's perfect, Misha. Thank you so much. And that's just really interesting work. Before we, and Hans is clapping. Okay. Before we go over to Ian and Scott, I just wanted to give a moment. Maybe we can take 5 minutes if anybody has any questions. We can, specifically for what Misha was presenting, we could do that. And then if not, we can move ahead with our BCI pioneers. Anybody?
Hi, Misha. Thank you for the excellent talk. Maybe a general question regarding ALS, because I read somewhere that ALS is very difficult to diagnose, especially in the early stages, because it interlaps with different other symptoms. So my question is, can BCI can be used as a tool for diagnostics as well, for like symptoms that doesn't have a definitive biomarker like ALS, so that it can be detected early in early stages and can be used for better treatment.
I'm not sure. ALS can be diagnosed with high sensitivity and specificity using the clinical exam and electromyography. So if there's a combination of upper motor neuron findings is pretty definitive.
Right.
So I'm not sure about doing a intracortical device as purely as a diagnostic. However, I don't know. I mean, I suppose there could be situations where
Right. Some diseases which has the point is that diseases which has a multitude of symptoms that is difficult to diagnose. Maybe maybe a combination of BCI or something could be used as a tool. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Everything in medicine obviously is risk benefit. So I think purely as a diagnostic, maybe not, but as sort of a combination diagnostic therapeutic, maybe.
Yeah, diagnostic therapeutic. Yeah, it's out of curiosity. Thanks,
Yes,
Misha. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Bottoms. Samuel, did you have a
I have a
question?
question. Hi, Misha.
Yeah, please.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Wonderful. So I'm interested in the clinical translation of this technology, specifically talking about that orthesis. So I know that the MyoPro that's used doesn't have this kind of native integration. Matter of fact, the only company that I'm tracking that's trying to do neural powered, intracranial powered orthesis for the hand is Phantom Neuro. So I want to know, what is the project that you briefly showed us at the very end? And do you know any other companies that perhaps are doing this integration with intracortical BCI to orthosis?
I'm not that I'm aware of. So we are designing our neurosleeve system, that we call it, both to be self-contained, but of course we've designed it specifically so that when a BCI is available, that we can connect to it. So I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not sure what else is out there. I mean, I know there are multiple FES systems and a couple of wearable robotic systems. I can send you some of the slides there's about, I don't know, 8 or 9 sort of companies. They tend to be self-contained. None of their business models seem all that sustainable. And in general, they don't seem that particularly clinically useful, which is why we went on this long path of trying to design our own, because everything else sort of sits in a closet. It doesn't really help the person. So I think there's 2 questions there. One is what's actually clinically useful in terms of restoring hand movement, and then the other one is will it be plug and play ready for some sort of BCI? And I can't speak to the others. We for our trial, we did partner with Myomo to be able to sort of talk to their device, but it was again, our participant didn't particularly like the weight of it and the feel, and so we had to make some pretty significant changes. Hopefully, our device will be available. We're happy to partner with you and whomever else in the coming few years. So we're making progress. We have people around in the community, including children, actually, who are using this to restore their upper extremity function.
Thank you. Paul, if you don't mind, a follow-up here.
Yeah, no problem. And then we'll go to Ian and Scott right after. Okay.
Just wondering how you assess the clinical outcomes, or rather, I saw on the slides that in this 2022 study, there were some functional benchmarks that you were comparing the performance of the participants against. But are there more standardized frameworks like ARAT that you try to test this against for the upper extremity function? Or what's the kind of framework that you try to contextualize this in terms of kind of activities of daily living?
Yeah, so stroke has a pretty standard set of outcome measures. where the goal is to restore the finger and hand movement to what it was before the stroke. So you mentioned the ARAT, the Action Research Arm Test. There's obviously the Fugel-Meyer. There's some surveys like something called the Able Hand. There's something called the Chidoki or Chidok. I don't know how exactly it's pronounced. And there are a couple of metrics. The vast majority of them are about restoring fine hand control. And so if the goal is to restore, and that particular, none of the orthoses can't do that, right? If you want to restore individual finger control, you need a different contraption, and it gets more and more complicated, bigger, heavier, and harder to scale and make useful. So we purposely said, we're not trying to restore the ability to play piano in that hand, right? Maybe the spinal cord stimulator that Marco Capogrosso and Mark Paloff design will be able to do that. I don't know. But in terms of a wearable device that's sort of pulling the fingers like Luke Skywalker hand in a prosthetic, I don't see how that can be shrunk and put on a hand. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to restore stabilization. And so for stabilization, you basically need a validated outcome measure that has to do with bimanual task control, right? And so I mentioned the Chidoki, there's a couple of the others. And the issue is the outcome measure has to match the functionality of the actual device. So midway of this trial, which was also in the middle of pandemic, I sort of lost my temper. I was very frustrated with how challenging the device was to use for our participants. So I tried to use it and do bimanual tasks. And it's incredibly difficult because of the way that the hand piece sort of closes on an object. One of its problems is that it only controls a few of the fingers. The other ones, which are very spastic, are fighting it. So you're in this crazy situation where you're trying to pick up an object. Some fingers are reaching, the others are pushing it away. Finding the Fugel-Meyer, the ARAT don't sort of take any of that into account. And so finding the right outcome measure is actually a big challenge. In the acute stroke, you're looking at the modified Rankin scale. There's a couple of other metrics, but I don't think this is a settled thing. For our neurosleeve, we're working on bimanual, validated bimanual tasks as our outcome measures, like the Chidoki.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for the questions, everyone. We're going to move ahead to Ian and Scott, but if you have any other discussion for this, we probably will have some time at the end as well. I know we have some folks on the call who are robotics folks, especially in prosthetics, and maybe they have some thoughts on this as well. Some of this, how to measure the outcome of using these devices. But I'll pass it over to Ian. Ian, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and great talk, Misha. I have a lot of comments and questions that I can't wait to talk to you after, but I will go ahead and share my screen here. I have a few slides here for Scott and I
We
to
can see
talk
it.
about. Awesome. Okay, so the BCI Pioneers Coalition is something that I started just a few years ago to help bring together individuals who have had BCIs implanted, both for motor control, communication control, really anyone who's used an intracortical device, to share our experiences, because there's been roughly high 60s in individuals who have been involved in experiments. And that's a pretty small number. And we want to be able to highlight these devices and get them out to as many people as possible, because we've seen them quite literally firsthand, how they've been able to help others and help ourselves. So myself, I'm Ian Burkhart. I was enrolled in a clinical trial with the Ohio State University in Battelle. I had one Utah array implanted in my motor cortex from April of 2014 to August of 2021. And we were mostly using the device to control FES on the forearm, so functional electrical stimulation, so that I can open and close my hand and also do individual digit control. Scott, if you want to go ahead and talk a little bit about yourself, just briefly, and then I'll get into some more slides here.
Yes, I joined the University of Chicago study in 2020, and I have 2 arrays implanted, 2 electrodes S1 and 2 electrodes M1 cortex. So we are the motor part of the control is like a no-brainer for me. We're doing a lot of in our study right now, they're working extensively with me in the sensory studies because I do have a lot of my own natural sensations, so they can do both mechanical stimulation and then do the brain stimulation to compare how similar they are, and using the cables from BlackRock, we could also record when they stimulate me. And so they've been collecting a whole lot of really cool data for me in the recent past here.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. So I will go ahead and share a little bit more details about my experience. So next, there's a little like kind of animated picture from a video that was taken of the first time I was able to restore hand movement. So like what was mentioned before, I had a C5 spinal cord injury, and I am unable to extend my wrist or move any of my fingers. So this was the first time that I was able to do that. It was roughly 4.5 years after my injury. And it was something that really I never thought I would be able to do again. And doctors told me multiple times that, you're never going to be able to walk again. You're never going to be able to move your hands again. But this really gave me a lot of hope for the future. Then we moved on to being able to do some more functional devices. There are functional tests. So here's one where I'm opening my hand to be able to pick up a bottle. It's filled with a bunch of dice because the engineers don't like water around their fancy electronics, which I completely understand. But you can see I was able to kind of have a power grasp to pick up that bottle and pour it. And then here I'm able to take a more fine-tuned pincer grasp to pick up a stir stick and be able to stir that, quote unquote drink. And this is something that's, certainly exciting for me because it could translate into me being able to do a lot more for myself on a day-to-day basis. Like I mentioned before, though, we were able to get individual finger movement. So here shows me being able to play Guitar Hero, which I thought was a lot more fun than some of the standardized task and outcome measures that we were testing all the time. And also, just lighten things up a little bit in the lab. However, we did only do about 3 or 4 different songs. So that was a little bit of a challenge because we got sick of those songs. But what's really exciting about this experiment is you can see that we were able to do individual finger control, but also the speed of the system. It was, me thinking about flexing a individual finger, and it works quick enough to where the cues are coming down the screen in the game, and I'm able to then respond, and it really felt like it was my own hand. Next, we have a kind of a more real world activity, and this was one that we were sitting around asking, what should we do next? And I, had a issue where I could be able to go out to a store, but not be able to swipe my credit card all the way through a device, and like I could get the card kind of perched in between my fingers and into the credit card reader, but I couldn't hold it firmly enough to slide it through the reader where it would actually get data from the card reader. So this is something that was exciting for me to be able to do. Now it's less of a thing because we can use tap to pay. But it's still really exciting to see that the researchers were able to kind of incorporate tasks that were important to me in my daily life. And that's something that, extended out through the whole study. This really worked as a way for me to get, 7.5 years of intensive occupational therapy that, most people do not get after a spinal cord injury, because I was able to keep using my hand all the time. And quite broadly, it led to more coordination in my shoulder. Because those are muscles that I can move volitionally even after my spinal cord injury, but I wasn't really able to practice using those until I had grip in my hands to move things around. So it then translated into me being able to do things at home when I'm not connected to the system, and then now even after being explanted with the device. Then towards the end of the study, we worked on driving a car with a simulator. So for this, I was thinking about extending my hand to signal for gas. I could pronate or supinate for steering. So I could run into or not run into light poles, as you can see. And then I could squeeze my hand to trigger the brake or reverse, which was really exciting. This project has since been picked up out of a Caltech lab. So I'm glad to see that that has continued, and just shows another future application for BCI control. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to Scott to talk through. There's a couple slides of him using his robotic arm and some of the finger control. But Scott, here, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Ian. That was a really great talk. Yeah, so this was my proud moment of shaking Scott Pelley's hand on 60 Minutes. And the thing that's really cool about this whole brain control interface is how fast your brain adapts when they program the decoder and everything, and you go through all the practice and everything, and then you start using it. The decoder always seems to have a deficiency where you can't move in one direction or another. Okay, it always seems like you can move the whole 360 except for up or down or whatever direction it may be that day. But it's really funny because I always find myself, if I can't like raise my arm, the robotic arm, my brain right away says, well, go up and around, and then you can raise your arm. So I think there's been great strides made with the decoder building and everything, and along with computer assist, I think it's ready to go to market right now, as long as you had a robotic arm that could function well with it. Now, a lot of the things that we're doing at the University of Chicago with me per se is the sensory stuff, which is really an amazing thing. So they got really lucky with me, and they got the electrodes, the sensory electrodes, right in the right place in the S1 cortex. And so like all my sensation is on my fingertips, from between my thumb and my ring finger. I don't have any sensation that they can stimulate on my pinky, but it's all on the tips, or some of them on the top side. Some of the sensations I get, deep sensations, and it's amazing how real to life that when certain channels are stimulated right away, it's like, oh yeah, like the first one that I noticed was on the back of my thumb, or the top of my thumb towards the side. I'm like, oh my God, it feels like I'm reaching into an evergreen and the pine needles are poking me. Or then when they did some that were like on the ring finger and the middle finger, it was like, oh my God, it feels like I'm touching my cell phone when it's on vibrate, and I could feel that same exact sensation. So now the thing that's amazing about the brain stimulation is, imagine being blindfolded, and if you're only stimulating one channel, someone says, okay, reach out and touch this, and you're like trying to figure it, and when you keep touching, it's like, yeah, it kind of feels like maybe it's an apple, And so, but now when they stimulate 4 channels at a time, all of a sudden my vision starts becoming more real. So I always like when they stimulate quads. The one quad that was really amazing was between the thumb and all the way down to the ring finger. And it was like, oh my God, I feel like I'm wrapping my hand around a baseball, because I could feel the pulling in the tendons, and it was just like an amazing thing, And so the more channels they stimulate at the same time, the better you could imagine what you're touching. Now, the thing that's really kind of crazy with the brain stimulation is certain channels, I may have to have them stimulated multiple times, 5, 6, 7 times before I can start deciding to how to explain it and everything, what it feels like. And then there's other channels that as soon as they stimulate right away, it's like, oh yeah, that's what it feels like. And then once my brain has determined what that sensation is, the next time they stimulate it, it's like I'm really kind of quick to saying, oh yeah, that's what that feels like again, So it's really a remarkable study that I'm part of. Right now, he was working on sensation where he can do multiple channels, so it feels like a horizontal movement or a vertical movement. Then he got really tricky. He was like the mad scientist, how to stimulate the different channels after I've drawn, the pictures on my hand or on the computerized hand on how I'm feeling it. And so he was like starting to do letters like an O, an I, a T. And so when he would stimulate all 4 of the channels at once or 5 channels at once to envision that, it was harder to envision. Like the circle was pretty easy, but the C was a little more difficult. But then when he did one channel after the other one, like someone was drawing on you, it was very easy to determine, what letter he was drawing on my fingers. So yeah, it's really super cool. The brain control, being part of this whole study, is just like the best experience I've ever had my whole entire life. So thank you, all you scientists that are working on this.
Yeah, likewise, it's really exciting to be able to participate in this type of technology and clinical trial. I mean, I think Scott and I both joined these trials, under the pretense that we're not really going to get anything out of it. I ended up getting a little bit of, like I said, occupational therapy out of it, which was fantastic. But it's really to hope for kind of the future generations to be able to use this type of technology. And that leads it right into kind of the next topic I wanted to discuss, and that we can then bring into questions is kind of the future of these devices. Like was mentioned earlier in Paul and Misha's talks, these devices right now, they're great at acquiring signal, but they're not the most compatible with your day-to-day life. Having a big pedestal sticking out of your skull and then a external cable that has to run to a computer and sometimes a rack full of computers to be able to process all that data and then go back to something that's your output effector. That works great in a lab, but it doesn't work great when you're sitting at home. There's been, a few trials where people have been able to use these devices in either a home-like setting or actually at home, which is really exciting. But I do think we need to get something that can be either fully implanted or minimally invasive, to the point where, you reduce that risk of infection long term. That was one of the reasons why I ended up getting my devices removed, because there was, obviously that ongoing risk of infection. And when the trial was over, there's really no need to continue keeping the device for, a hope in the future to use it. But it's really exciting to see now more and more companies working on devices that are fully under the skin to eliminate that risk. And, it just works a little bit better with your life. You don't have, something sticking under your skull, which is, interesting, but also kind of raises questions sometimes from the general public. But I think on top of that, also, one of the things that was interesting in Misha's talk is talking about kind of how are these devices clinically validated. Right now, a lot of them can be used to improve quality of life, but not necessarily help sustain your life. I mean, for me, it's not going to completely replace a caregiver. So from like an insurance perspective, it's a little bit more of a challenging conversation for them. But you're looking at the quality of life restorement, which is, fantastic. So that's a whole nother discussion that needs to happen, and making sure that these devices get to the people who need them. But with that, I'll throw it back to Scott if he has any last minute things to add, and then we can go back to the whole group for questions.
Yeah, I'd like to, you reminded me about talking about the benefits you get from it, so like they always told me in the beginning, the FDA pretty much mandates them to any of the research studies to say that it is no benefit to me. But the crazy thing is the mental benefit. You give a person new purpose, and you want to start trying so many new things. You talk about the participant from out in Pittsburgh. He started going to concerts again and everything because all of a sudden he's like, wow, I really can do things. It's and for me, I know the other benefit I've got, like when the doctor would come in every month to make sure everything was fine, he'd run his hands down both my arms. Originally, after my injury and before I started this study, it was always kind of a dull sensation on my hand and arm on this side. Okay, it was I could feel things, but you know, hot and cold are hot is cold and cold is hot, and that's still that way. But when Dr. Dave would come in and run his hands down both my arms all the way down to my fingertips, all of a sudden, like a couple months in, I'm like, oh my God, Dr. Dave, it feels exactly the same on both sides now. So the brain stimulation there, it's done like really different things. I know my fine motor skills are a little bit better. Like when my hand would go up my arm, I could only get up to here, and then my hand would close and I could get to about this far up. Now it's like I can go all the way to the back of my shoulder right now, of course, because I'm nervous, my hand won't open, but I could have my hand open on my shoulder with my fingertips over the back of my shoulder. And I couldn't do that before this whole brain stimulation thing started. So I believe it's the brain stimulation. And then the Von Hares that they tested both sides with before I started the study. John Downey actually says that I do have better stimulation, a better sensation on the right hand now. So there's no way to actually prove it because they didn't start the study that way, you know, try to prove any benefits that would give me personally, but it did do some things of personal benefit. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott, and thanks, Ian. I, of course, have probably 100 questions I would like to ask, but since I'm in charge here, I'm going to give everybody else the opportunity. So if anybody has any questions, we have about 10 minutes left on our what we had scheduled. Maybe some people can stick around a little bit, or if you have questions, we can post maybe some contact info at the end so folks can follow up. But did anybody have any questions for our guests? Robin.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I would like to personally thank Michelle, Ian, and Scott for the wonderful talks, and it's really inspirational. And something that we are trying to do in B-CRATOS could be also, in the long run, come somewhere in the space of BCI and brain-machine interface to a real use case. One question that crossed my mind when Ian was saying that people sometimes would have a peculiar outlook on something sticking out of the skull, for instance, when it comes to wearable kind of solutions. B-CRATOS is also committed to make solutions that can be completely implanted, in the long run. So we are also thinking about having implants that can go under the scalp and having the communication within the body, and then you make an interface with the whatever extremity that you would like to wear. So the question here is mostly about the usability. Do you still think that a complete implantable solution where nothing sticks out could be the way to go, could be the future?
I'd love to see us get there at some point, but in the meantime, I do think it's really important to get these devices out into the hands of the people who need them as much as possible. You're going to learn a lot from people using them in the real world, and you're going to bring improved quality of life to the people who are able to use them. When you look at, you survey a general population, oh, would you have brain surgery? A lot of people would say no. But for people like Scott and myself, would you have brain injury, or would you have brain surgery to hopefully restore some quality of life to yourself after losing a lot of that from a spinal cord injury in our cases? Yes. Like it really changes that whole decision paradigm. So you kind of need to balance it, but I think that also helps with development, where you can figure out what's really needed. It makes it maybe a little bit more challenging on the regulatory and reimbursement side, but that's for smarter people to figure out than me. I think it is, something that you just need to get out to the people so they can benefit from it as much as possible and refine it as we go along.
I have
Thank
a bit of a related question just regarding implanted versus not fully implanted. There are some systems out there that are fully implantable, but maybe less powerful than having, like Scott has 4 implanted Utah arrays, and, you can collect an awful lot of data on that. In terms of the impact on quality of life, how do you look at that trade-off? Like you could have something fully implanted, but maybe it just helps you a little bit in a few small ways versus something that is not fully implanted, maybe requires more maintenance and care, but is more powerful, can provide more complex control of devices or more rehab opportunities, but maybe has a limited time window. Like how do you look at that from a user perspective?
Scott, do you want to start with that, and then I'll add some thoughts?
I think anything that you could help us out with where we don't have to depend on someone else would be a great improvement to anyone with a disability. It's like, because us as humans, we don't want to depend on someone. We don't always want to ask for help. And so I think like with our study, they always make the control for me harder and harder. They turn the power way down so I could barely feel it. And they want me to tell me how is it easy to use now or whatever. I think if you make things easier and simpler and you get it out on the market and let a lot of different companies take the opportunity to try to develop something, you're going to go a lot farther, and make it simple. Remember, Texas Instrument first calculator was basically 2 + 2 is 4, 4 + 4 is 8, and then all of a sudden they released that to the public, and then everyone in the whole world wanted to make calculators to try to grab some of the money. So I think let's make something just simple and functionable, and just even doing the simplest things. If I didn't have the use that I have in my hands, I'm like really kind of blessed. That's why I joined this study. I think of someone like Jan, the first participant in Pittsburgh, and she was eating a candy bar for the first time, with the robotic hand. She's just like, oh my God, so make it simple, make things be able to do just the littlest thing. And the person with the disability, it just gives them so much more drive that they can accomplish so much more.
Yeah, I think Scott hit on a really important topic there as far as giving patients the choice. There are going to be some people like Scott and myself who will say, yeah, I'll have brain surgery that I, don't need and may not benefit from. There's going to be other people who have been like, well, I've already been through so much in my life, I don't want to add on another surgery. So maybe a wearable option is something best for them. So I do think that it's good to have options there. And, mostly, you're going to have higher resolution data that's coming out of something that's implanted cortically versus something that's, a EEG based device that's externally worn. But it depends on what your use case is. Do you just need to be able to do like an open close for a exoskeleton arm to provide that stabilization? Or do you really need to be able to input, fine sensory information or individual digit information? And, then also how easy is it going to be used for the patient? Are they going to have a lot of mental load when they're trying to think about using the device, or is it going to become second nature at some point?
Yeah, and I guess the take home from your guys' response is just get the devices out there and we'll find a way to make it work for us, right? And I think that's part of it too. Like you say, your brain adapts to it. Even if it isn't the most sophisticated device, the users will find a way to make it help them, right? That's part of it too.
There is one caveat there, though. You don't want to rush something out that then is going to kind of spoil the market in a sense where like, oh, that's just a parlor trick or that's junk. No one's ever going to use it, because there's plenty of assistive technology devices that end up in people's closets because they don't actually work well. So that's where I think it's really important to involve the end users as much as possible in the creation of the devices. So it's going to be something that they'll want to use and want to, help progress further.
Definitely, especially if you're putting something in someone's head, you need to, yeah.
Then one of the trade-offs is too, well, it's not really a trade-off, is, with the computer assist, there's so much you could make with computers, we could actually help the human, whoever the implant had, whoever has the implant or whatever, with the aid of the computer, it could help operate the device. So I know a lot like at University of Chicago, they want to try to make it as natural as possible without any computer assist. But with the computer assist, it's a no-brainer on how to operate the robotic hand and arms.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, Nicola, did you have a question? I noticed your camera went on. I was just
Thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
it was a very
and
interesting.
I think this will be our last question, by the way, everybody. Sorry.
Thank
we're
you,
at
thank
time.
you.
Yep.
I'm honored. By the way, very interesting for me. I'm a philosopher, so I am more familiar with ethical issues surrounding these technologies. And I was wondering, what is your perspective from the user side instead of the philosophers who reflect on potential issues, social and ethical issues. We often read about the risk of brain hacking or mind reading. What is the perspective from you have using these technologies?
I think it really boils down to the individual user, and you want to pose that question to them. As long as they have all the information available to make an informed decision, then it should be kind of in their plate. But I obviously see the either the skepticism or the concern. For me, having a device implanted in my motor cortex, if someone wants to be able to see the raw data that's coming out of my brain when I'm thinking about using my hand for any activity, sure. That, doesn't, pales in comparison to me actually being able to use my hand on a day-to-day basis. We all give up a lot of privacy to use Zoom, to use Google, to use any of these services that are collecting data on us. Now, I do think that these questions are going to amplify as we are starting to collect from other areas of the brain. If you're using the device for communication, then it's essentially a logbook of everything you say. But there's that kind of differentiation between what you're thinking about doing and what you actually do. If everyone is able to read someone's mind and think about, I feel like running into this person in front of me while I'm driving my car because they're driving like an idiot or something like that, but you don't actually do that. So I think that, you have to strike that balance between not wanting to kind of theorize things to death, but actually wanting to get something out that can help people, while at the same point really having all the information available to someone who's going to be using the device so that they can make that best decision as possible.
Thank you so much.
Scott, did you have anything to
I
add?
just add to that for a moment. It's everything in life that we do. There's a risk-reward balance. We got to each decide for each individual what's the risk and what's the reward. That look at all the medications that are out on the market. They all have a risk. But if it helps you physically be able to function daily, then the reward outweighs the risk. So.
And I do think there can be something done on the data collection side as far as how long that data is retained, who has access to it, to really minimize a lot of that. And as computers get more powerful, you will be able to make sense about even more of the data. But at the same time, you may not need all of that data to actually do your intended output task. So if that data can be, kind of dumped to the side, or if it can be just discarded so that way no one has access to it. I think that eliminates some of the fears as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Before we break, I know we're at 1 hour, so thank everybody. I want to thank everybody for being here and for the lively discussion. Misha, you had mentioned something earlier about an incubator that you guys you have put together at Jefferson. And I was wondering if you could maybe just for a couple minutes before we break, describe a little more about that. How does that exactly work, this incubator? Are you guys working with startups? Are you working with other research groups? Can you give us a little more of the picture of that?
Sure. It's aspirational, right? I mean, I think
Okay.
the point is that we're anything that we develop, we want to be able to commercialize and get to people. So, you know, publications and grants obviously have their function, but ultimately, in order to get it to people, we have to make a business case. So, for the NeuroSleeve, we've been working on a pitch deck and working with our tech transfer office, and we have several other projects in line and ideas for each one of them. We start thinking about commercialization from the get-go. What's the business case? Not just what's the FDA safety efficacy, but what's the insurance, you know, reasonable and necessary. But it's aspirational, so stay tuned.
Okay, so right now it's more internal, but yeah, it could. Okay, perfect. Thank you. I was just curious. There was something new I hadn't heard that was going on there. Of course, when I hear you guys are maybe doing something with memory, I already am like, okay, yeah, I maybe know what could be going on there. So, okay, great. I think, yeah, we're at time. I just wanted to say, I think Ian had posted his contact information in the meeting chats. If Misha, if you, Ian, and Scott are okay with it, maybe we could mail the attendees your contact info, an email where people could send you some out there. We have Misha's email as well. So I think we'll maybe follow up also with the contact information for the speakers. If anybody wants to sign up for our newsletter too, so they can be keep posted on future webinars. Again, thank you so much, Misha, Ian, and Scott, for joining us. This was really just we've been talking a lot about technology so far, not hearing so much about the clinical side and the user side. This is really a real pleasure to have you with us today. So thank you so much. Thanks for getting up early for us over here in Europe as well. So.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you, Paul.
Yep. Take care, everyone.
Take care.
Have a good rest of the day.